Coming up in this episode of In Clear Focus...
It's not enough to just have a character, I would say. You need a distinctive character with a distinct story and an interesting personality. And that is where marketers, designers, storytellers come in. That's where human creativity comes in. That's where the craft comes in. And that will never go away. That will never be replaced by AI.
You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on marketing and advertising produced weekly by Big Eye, a strategy-led full-service creative agency growing brands for clients globally. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, Big Eye's Chief Strategy Officer. Thank you for joining us. Brand mascots are among the most effective tools in the marketer's toolkit. Research from Ipsos shows that brand characters are 5 times better than logos or slogans at driving branded attention, while System 1 data reveals that long-term campaigns featuring mascots increase profit gains by over 34% compared to those without them. Yet, in a world dominated by performance marketing, AI-generated content, and fragmented attention, mascots remain one of the most potent and yet misunderstood distinctive brand assets. Today's guest has spent the past 4 years exploring this intersection of character-driven branding, evidence-based marketing science, and generative AI. Stef Hamerlinck is a brand strategist and the creator of the Let's Talk Branding podcast, in which he interviewed noted evidence-based marketing thinkers, including Byron Sharp, Jenny Romaniuk, and Phil Barden. Last summer, Stef produced a documentary exploring how mascots faded from prominence and why they're making a comeback. He's also the creator of Marcel, an AI-generated blue dog mascot that serves as a distinctive brand asset for his own consultancy, and through his Substack newsletter, Marcel's Lab, Stef shares frameworks and experiments for building character-driven brands in the AI era. To discuss why brand mascots are returning, what makes them effective, and how AI is transforming character creation, I'm delighted that Stef is joining us today from Ghent in Belgium. Stef, welcome to In Clear Focus.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Well, Stef, you started your career as a designer before moving into brand strategy as an independent strategist and educator with an ongoing role at the health tech company Alan. So what was it about the intersection of brand characters and evidence-based thinking about distinctive brand assets that first captured your attention?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing where in hindsight, it all makes sense, but like during the process, it didn't so much. So I was always just fascinated by animation movies, by drawing, by characters. And when I was doing brand strategy, I discovered the whole Ehrenberg Bass Institute, How Brands Grow, Distinctive Brand Assets by Jenny Romaniuk. And I was instantly hooked, and I saw like the discrepancy between these evidence-based principles and a lot of like the brand strategy world just totally ignoring it or not being aware of that. And so I started designing brands and building brands with this new lens of, okay, how can we be very distinctive? And usually like logos, slogans, graphic design in general, like it's not very distinctive, it's not very memorable. There's also a lot of science around that, like the Power of You by Ipsos, which was a study done a few years back, really showed that most brands are not distinctive and most brands use the most common assets like logos and typefaces and colors. And you have these brand books that go into infinity about how much margin and white space, but people don't really remember that stuff. While characters, they do. And I didn't see any characters myself, but I also wasn't able to make them myself per se. Like I had some experience with 3D design and illustration, but I wasn't good at it. And so I had the luck of joining Alan, which was a brand that had a mascot. So I was able to start working with that mascot. I jumped in the actual physical suit. I did campaigns with that. And then generative AI came along. And all of a sudden, like there was this new set of tools and technology that allowed me to not only like play around with existing characters through shoots or 3D agencies or illustrators, but actually make it myself, control them myself, become like the puppet master, sort of speaking. And so this opened the box of Pandora for me. And at the same time, I was doing this documentary where I basically tried to figure out, why are there any more mascots? Like, they're hugely effective. What's happening? And so this whole journey of understanding that, with at the same time generative AI developing and me having the chance to play around with it at scale at Alon, and then also me building my own newsletter with Marcel, which is like my scrappy blue dog sidekick, where we can do a lot of explorations. That's basically the journey of how we got here to this mascot fetish moment.
Well, your documentary, titled Are Mascots Back?, traces the history of brand mascots from what you describe as their golden age through their decline and now their comeback. You featured some great contributors. What did you learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, one of like my favorites probably of the show is like Paul Feldwick. If How Brands Grow was like the theoretical framework around how it works, Paul Feldwick's books, like How Does the Peddler Sing, they filled in this empty, cold, scientific space with ideas and inspiration of like marketing should be entertaining. And characters are obviously one of the best ways to drive this entertainment. So Paul Feldwick's contribution in this documentary about the importance of character, his examples of the Cresta Bear as like an iconic character, are things that I really enjoyed. And then talking to Orlando from System 1 was also very good, because like he really confirmed that they actually saw a huge decline in the database of the IPA of characters being used. So it wasn't just my feeling of, are they disappearing? No, they actually are disappearing. And again, System 1's thinking around the effectiveness of these characters confirmed it. So I had a bit of the science. I had people from advertising that also talked about the golden ages, and all of these things connected. It was just super fascinating.
I grew up with the Cresta Bear. It's frothy, man.
It's frothy, man.
Yeah. Now, you studied dozens of contemporary mascots across categories, right? From CPG to fintech to B2B SaaS. Stef, what separates the mascots that are genuinely effective from those that are forgettable or even counterproductive?
I have this little framework. It's not scientifically validated on the level of Ehrenberg-Bass, so bear with me here. The first level of a good mascot is just basic distinctiveness. And actually, I've developed a simple test for this, because distinctiveness is not that hard. If, for example, your mascot is quite unknown, you're launching a new one, like how can you really know if people remember it? There's not a way to measure the fame, because there isn't. So the fame and uniqueness measurement framework of Jenny Romaniuk doesn't really work for a lot of brands wanting to start out. So I built this basic test, which is like a silhouette test, just showing your mascot in like black and white profile. Does it still stand out? Do you still recognize key features? Blur is another one of those tests where you blur it. This is a situation where like 99% of the time, your content of your brand doesn't appear very clear. It's maybe people are scrolling, maybe they're driving, whatever's happening. And then fragment is again this problem of, if you only show a small piece of your mascot, maybe it's like somebody's driving by, it's in the corner of their eye, maybe it's walking out of frame. Is it still recognizable? So there's 3 little tests you can do. You can actually go and test them yourself on marcelmascot.com if you want. That's the base layer, distinctiveness. Is it recognizable? Is it iconic enough in terms of visual element? Then there's a second layer, which is entertainment. It's good if you have something that's easily recognizable. You can slap it on your packaging and likely people will be easier to spot it. But then it's like, if you make people feel stuff when they see that mascot, like the Cresta Bear is a cool looking bear, but when it dances and when it sings and the whole attitude it has, and when it says it's frothy, man, that's not just pure distinctiveness, that's entertainment. It's usually driving engagement, and that's what makes people fall in love with some of these characters. And so that second level is really understanding the core of what is entertainment, how do you build entertainment, how do you get people engaged, hooked. It's all about personality, basically. Like I often say this, personality is the only moat that you still have as like with generative AI, content production on its own. And even like it used to be that you could produce high value, like very professional looking content, and you're already beyond your competition because they didn't bother doing that. But today, like you can do a super fancy 3D animation with generative AI if you have the right people in place. And so that's not enough anymore. So again, entertainment, personality, I think those are the things that make that character even more successful. And then there's the last part, which is what I call like playability. So it's entertaining you, that's great. It's standing out, that's great. But can you actually interact with it? Are there ways to interact with it? And that's where I think there's a new wave of how you can actually interact with characters. We're seeing fans of all IPs right now remixing their favorite Nintendo characters. Like they're remixing Stranger Things almost as it happens instantaneously. And this has always existed. Like even in the old days, people were remaking shows and doing their own interpretation. So playability is not something purely technological, but it is this thing where a lot of new technology allows you to really engage in a way with characters. And that's, of course, where AI again comes in. Like you have AI companions. So basically you can start talking real time to a mascot. Like imagine if George Clooney for Nespresso was also the one in the customer support where you can ask questions directly to George and he says, what else at the end of your little conversation? I mean, there's an infinite possibility here in terms of what you can do. But those three levels, distinctiveness, entertainment, and then playability are, I think, key to building a good character. And I would say building a brand universe around that is not just like slapping a good character on something.
Well, Stef, this isn't just theory with you. This is actually practice, because recently you've been experimenting with generative AI tools to create and iterate on mascots, including, as you mentioned, your own character, Marcel. Could you take us sort of behind the scenes of how you created him and how you maintain consistency across your different outputs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, before Marcel, there was Otto, rest in peace. Marcel ate the poor pigeon, I think. But Otto was like a first iteration, and not a good one in the sense that I also created this one with AI. But the pigeon had all sorts of problems. It couldn't really talk very well. I couldn't animate it properly. Like it was always all over the place. So Marcel was born out of a need to be more adapted to AI in the first place. And so I started exploring how could this character look. There's a lot of back and forth between me and the computer of like, I like dogs, but I don't want a typical dog. It needs to be very distinctive. So I played around with colors and then with also all sorts of accessories to make it like not your average dog and give it some depth and some interesting. And then I started thinking also about the personality. What does it want to achieve? And this was in the whole time where there still is a lot about Trump and MAGA. And so I gave it a hat which says Make Mascots Great Again, MMGA instead of MAGA, of course, which was a bit of like tongue in cheek, just playing around, triggering people basically, which is this, second layer of entertainment and sometimes even introducing some friction into the character. So Marcel was created. And you can actually find a lot of tutorials on my newsletter on how to actually go from this one character frontal view to side views to having a really good, what we call a character sheet, which is basically an overview of your character from all angles, different poses, different expressions. So you have a clear understanding of how it should behave. But this was pre-Nano Banana Pro, which is Google's latest model, and that basically solved all of the problems. Before that, there was a lot of messing around, and basically it was almost like a slots machine where you had to do a lot of fiddling to get your character to feel consistent. And honestly, it wasn't always consistent. For me, that's why I tried to build a character that's, okay, blue dog, orange hat, skull color. It's obviously Marcel. Maybe he looks a little bit different. But then Nano Banana Pro came along, and this is basically the model that changed everything, because you can feed it that character sheet and it will like 99% respect the consistency of the character. So this was the real game changer, and I recommend people to just try. Like, even I've started this small series called Character Drawing a Day, which I've been doing for the last 10 days. draw a little doodle of a character you think, like just something very simple. Take a photo of it, drag it into your Google Gemini or FreePic. This model is available in a lot of places. Drag it in there and just say, turn this into a 3D character. And then once you have the 3D character, say, turn this into a character sheet with multiple poses. And you'll be surprised how good it is and how fast you can go from concept, doodle, character, multiple angle to something consistent that you'll be able to use in your media. So that's been the big game changer for sure.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after this message.
Hello, I'm Sarah Montano, the author of Retail Marketing, Contemporary Approaches to Retailing in the Digital and Experience Economy, published by Kogan Page. Drawing on my experience as an academic of over 20 years, a former retail professional and a media commentator, I cover the issues that impact contemporary retail practice, such as how physical and digital retail are merging into phygital experiences, what drives customer behaviour and loyalty, how to align your brand with consumer values around ethics and sustainability, and the technologies transforming how people shop. The book includes links to online resources, real-world case studies, and practical frameworks you can apply immediately, whether you're a student delving into retail for the first time or a retailer developing a go-to market strategy, optimizing customer experience, or just trying to stay ahead of retail trends. As an In-Clear Focus listener, you can save 25% on retail marketing when you order directly from koganpage.com. Just enter the exclusive promo code BIG-I25 at the checkout. Shipping is always complimentary for customers in the US and the UK. I hope the insights and frameworks in my book help you create stronger retail strategies and develop deeper customer connections.
Welcome back. I'm talking with brand strategist Stef Hamerlinck about brand mascots and the role of generative AI in creating these distinctive brand assets. Stef, as you mentioned, you've turned your mascot experimentation now into client work and a Substack newsletter, Marcel's Lab. How did that evolution happen?
I've always been communicating about whatever my journey was in brand building. So before that, I had a podcast called Let's Talk Branding, where I shared all of my findings through newsletters, through podcast interviews with all of my heroes. And so I already built in this reflex of sharing the journey, but now, the content changed. So it was a logical evolution for me to really go in that direction. It was only a few months ago that I actually realized that I should also rebrand the whole thing. It was still called Let's Talk Branding, and it didn't really make sense anymore. So that's when I said, okay, I already have Marcel. Let's turn it into Marcel's Lab and make it the thing where, hey, this is the frontier where we're exploring characters and generative AI and how you can build brands with that. And so, it kind of grew organically. And then I had this little thing called Marcel's Sandbox, which is a place where you can go, where you can test some of this stuff out. You can generate images with Marcel, you can hug with him, you can do all sorts of testing. And actually, it was really interesting. I saw people testing their mascots, and then they came to me okay, I have some problems here. How can we do that? So automatically, I started helping where I could in the projects that felt really interesting to me. And I had one of these projects that was such a dream fell in my lap. I was just doing a podcast on a Belgium show about mascots. And then after this guy who's an agency owner said, we still need a mascot actually for Dreamland, which is one of the biggest toy retailers here in, I'd say, this part of Europe. And so this is a brand, that I've known as a kid, it's a very close thing. And so all of a sudden I get this opportunity to make a mascot, which is a mascot at scale. I mean, it's sitting on trucks, it's in big stores, 10 meters big. It's walking in suits. It's going to big toy expos around the world. So it's so cool to see. And that was one of those moments where it was a magical moment of, okay, it's been a journey, but now we're actually making stuff, helping brands implement it. And that's been just fascinating.
Well, it's been fascinating to watch your journey towards that for sure. Jenny Romaniuk, you mentioned, of course, is featured in your documentary. She literally wrote the book on building distinctive brand assets, and I should mention, has also been a guest on this show. She cautions against over-investing in any single distinctive asset. So, Stef, how do you think about mascots within a broader brand system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of ways to frame it. I think I used to call it like a palette, like a palette of assets that you use. And obviously, the most interesting part is when you combine the right assets. Like, for example, if you combine a character and sonic branding, characters on their own like 7 times more memorable and sound something like that. Together, it's like 15 times more memorable. So if you have even like the Aflak duck, I don't know if you know this duck.
Yes, of course.
It's like, it literally says the brand name, but in a way that a duck is doing the shouting. And this is iconic and it's very smart because it's reinforcing the brand name while also just being funny because, you know, what does an insurance has to do with this little duck? And so that's a great example of combining like sonic branding with characters, for example. But what is a cohesive brand universe? It's not just a character. It's not just a sound. It's not even just a look. It's like combining all of these things into something that you can keep tapping into for a long term. And that's where I think a lot of brands like kind of miss the boat on one. Yes, let's pick one character and only do that. It's not a good idea. But also every quarter reinventing themselves and like doing all sorts of different variations of storytelling and formats and stuff, and basically never working on something that's compounding. And I think if you have the right assets and if you have that bigger universe to think about, then it becomes this really interesting thing where it's like every campaign, you don't start from scratch. You start like, what can we do in this universe that's interesting and fresh, but also like reiterates and feels familiar. And so, yeah, it's a bigger topic than just distinctive brand assets and characters alone. Like the meerkats, for example, compare the market. You have this one character, Alexander Orlov, who's like, you know, the original Compare the Meerkat character. But they build a whole world around it. Like you have the town of Mirkovo, you have Otto Sergei, you have lots of characters. There's a dialect, there's a way of talking, there's a behavior. And all of these things keeps this brand fresh. Like when they had AI, all of a sudden now they have Otto Sergei. Like they can introduce new assets. And again, it's sonic branding because of the way of talking, like the Russian accent is very like unique. And so you can do a radio ad and still summon the universe without seeing the mascot. And that's the power, I think, when you start combining these assets and also like thinking about a broader cohesive universe to tap into. I think that's the secret to building long-term brands.
For a CMO or brand director listening to our conversation today, who's considering whether a mascot might be right for their brand, what are the minimum conditions you recommend they have in place before committing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it's important, like first, you just need to make sure that you have a good understanding of what your brand is about. Like those fundamentals of, you know, brand strategy don't go away. Don't throw them out of the window because all of a sudden characters are cool. What is your brand personality? What is your brand positioning? These things matter because they will be a good foundation to develop a character that makes sense in that story. So first, have a look at that. Let's start with the basics. Even on the level of like brand identity, if you have a very ugly or cheap looking brand and you want to be positioned as premium, like no mascot is going to solve that problem. You need to solve the way you communicate, the tone of voice, the way you look, everything. There's a lot of work to be done before that. So that's table stakes. Make sure you understand that your brand is already there in terms of how it looks and how it's positioned. And then the interesting thing about characters is a lot of brand owners say like, it's not for me. One, I would say, actually, I haven't seen a lot of industries, except for maybe super high-end fashion and luxury. But even there's some cool exceptions, I think. I haven't seen a lot of categories where characters don't work. Like B2B, we have this perception that it shouldn't work, but it does. It does exactly because, you know, it's interesting and it's playful and it breaks through the stereotypes of the category. So yeah, I think it's like first get your ducks in a row and then develop your own little duck, whatever it is. And the main thing is like what I do see now is, and I think that's a normal issue that you have when the technology becomes so accessible. What we'll see is we'll see really good characters and we'll see a lot of very bad characters because it's so accessible. So people say, oh yeah, I also want a fluffy little thing. So they just go somewhere and they say, make me a fluffy bear. And then they say, this is our mascot, and like this should work. But that's the thing, like going back to these 3 levels of distinctiveness, entertainment, playability, it's not enough to just have a good character. Well, it's not enough to just have a character, I would say. You need a distinctive character with a distinct story and an interesting personality. And that is where marketers, designers, storytellers come in. That's where human creativity comes in. That's where the craft comes in. And that will never go away. That will never be replaced by AI, I think. So make sure, and that's maybe the part where if you are a CMO thinking about this, make sure you invest in either people in-house that are like strong in terms of creativity, or that you invest in a partner that can be creative, think conceptually, and not just in terms of like, yeah, sure, we can render fluffy bears, no problem. And I think that's important that you are able to invest in this long term, because if you're not able to commit to it, and if you expect it to, like you create a character and next campaign it should explode, this is not how it works. Like it's compounding. People need to get familiar with the character, and over time this will become a very powerful asset, but not straight away. So if you're in it for the short term, cheap solution, then definitely don't go there. It will disappoint you.
On your Substack, you've also written about the coming wave of AI companions and interactive brand characters, from robotics to chat interfaces. Stef, how should brand builders prepare?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fascinating area where on the one hand, it's scary. I mean, we've all seen the humanoid robots and it feels a bit like an episode of, Black Mirror. So on the one hand, I'm like, do we really need all of this stuff? But on the other hand, I'm actually very excited when I do see, for example, robotics or more like typical online avatars with real characters that actually introduce friction. Like even on the most basic level, when first off, I switched from OpenAI's ChatGPT to Claude because I heard it was better at being like a bit more critical. When I switched to it and I asked it to give me like a real critical look at what I've been doing and have been thinking, like it was actually the first time that I sat back and was like, oof, okay, that was kind of harsh, but needed. Thank you. And this is where the value is. This is where something interesting happens when characters or these LLMs can create friction. And I think that's what we're often missing in this space is like, don't try to be vanilla and solve everything for everyone. And that's the problem with a lot of what ChatGPT is doing. It's just trying to please users in whatever direction possible. And I think that's where characters are exactly great, because you can have a set character with a behavior and a backstory and motivations, and you can have people interact with it and learn from it without it having to be like 100% adapted to you. And I think that's where hopefully we'll see brands be smarter about building IP and at the same time, servicing their customers through this companion layer. And yeah, I'm excited about it. But again, as all of these things, there will be a wave of just boring, overly friendly, adaptable characters that aren't really characters because they don't have character. And then there will be really unique, smart brands that do very cool stuff with this.
Well, when we were preparing for this interview, you actually showed me some 3D printed mascots that you'd made and given to your clients. How important is extending characters into physical touch points, would you say?
Yeah, that's where it becomes like so interesting. Obviously, having them physically in your hand is just like it's a different way of connecting things. So when you go from like a character you see online the whole time to a physical character, whether that's like a bear you get from a campaign or you see an actual suit, there's something magical. Like I don't know if you've been to Disney, but seeing those characters in real life, even as an adult, I'm somewhat impressed by them. Like, they're not real, but in some way it's like making it tangible is such an interesting way. And so when you have a brand and you have this character and you can bring it back to physical touch points. That's such an opportunity because it brings the universe into these daily conversations or events or whatever types of campaigns you do. So I think it's very important. And I think it also reduces a bit the idea of like, oh, so this is an AI generated character that never goes beyond the digital touch point. I think that's risky to do it. So making it physical also makes it more trustworthy and real. And then that again impacts the way you present it digitally. So yeah, it's a very smart play, and I think people should explore it.
Well, Stef, thank you. You've been very generous with your insights. This was a great conversation. If listeners would like to learn more about your work or subscribe to your newsletter, Marcel's Lab, or indeed just connect with you directly, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, so visit labmarcel.substack.com. It's the number one place. And then otherwise, go find me on LinkedIn. I'm very responsive. I'm always trying to answer any questions you have. Interested to learn also about your challenges. And then if you want to hug Marcel or have some fun, just go to marcelmascot.com and see what other people have been making. It's just a good laugh, but also a little bit of a moment where you can appreciate the powers of like generative AI and in this way.
Stef, thank you very much for being our guest this week on In Clear Focus.
Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Thanks again to my guest this week, Stef Hamerlinck, brand strategist and creator of Marcel's Lab. As always, you'll find a complete transcript of our conversation with timestamps and links to the resources we discussed on the In Clear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com. Just select Insights from the menu. Thank you for listening to In Clear Focus, produced by Big Eye. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. Until next week, goodbye.